Data, advertising, and ethics. So I think this is kind of a cool topic, and this really gets into some of the misconceptions of what we know in terms of things on social media that we read, things that we see from media influencers, and in terms of talking about what is science and how science back up certain things. So this is actually going to talk a lot about like pharmaceutical advertising. We'll have a lot of examples that have to deal with that. And the big thing that I've always heard with this in terms of data is that first and foremost, always the numbers do not lie. And this has always been kind of a common maxim that I've heard over the course of, well, since I've been able to engage effectively in media literacy, is that people say numbers don't lie, that if I read a statistic, it means something, and therefore it is obviously true. So, which, if you really sit back and think, we're going to explain why that is not at all true. And we're also going to talk a little bit about what makes the numbers actually lie a little bit in terms of some of the ways that they can be falsified just because of the way that they're reported or the way that the study is done and so forth. So, data and scientific research and how it's reported. So I'm going to show you a couple examples that I thought were really fun and interesting, or just really absurd. And they all kind of come into advertising. So the examples I'm showing you here typically, again, kind of fall into pharmaceuticals or health claims. So down at the bottom, you've got Dr. Oz, which obviously ran into a huge problem with the FTC. And basically unsubstantiated claims about health and use of pharmaceuticals, and that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem to be able to say something and then actually not have the science to back it up, or falsifying the data or simplifying the data. I mean, we've talked about marginalization in the last two classes. This is oversimplification of what scientists, and Dr. Oz is obviously not the only culprit of this. TED Talks can be equally as bad in this case, as much as I like a good TED Talk. The issue is that this can be reported inaccurately, or again, it can be what Carl Sagan would classify as pseudoscience. So it's not actually science, it's just claims that don't have the scientific rigor that is needed to make this worthwhile in terms of discussing in terms of truth. A couple of the other ones, cheat death within Palm Wonderful. This actually found some bad FTC problems as well in terms of implementations of saying that if you drink pomegranate juice, this will help with the risk of prostate cancer, which this was something that Palm fought and said, look, we're not necessarily saying you can cheat death per se, and this is a mock ad here, but it is something that you might have, there might be some correlation between, again, Palm Wonderful and decrease in prostate cancer, or prevention in this case. So and the other one on the left here is the Above the Influence. That one of my favorite ads from them, actually, was a collection of ads that they said were so effective that this got people to, adolescents specifically, to be less likely to engage in marijuana usage, which is an interesting thing, because when they report the study, this is how they reported it, and saying, with these commercials, it is less likely for people to engage in marijuana usage. But if you actually look at the study, as I have, you'll actually see that it is included with a school prevention program with the advertisements that actually helps in terms of decreasing. The commercials alone, as another study reports, actually has a boomerang effect for something with what's called high sensation seeking. So, in other words, the exaggerated appeals of the advertisements actually were so ludicrous of what happens when you use marijuana that people were actually more willing to try it. So again, it had a boomerang effect in this case. And then my personal favorite, and I have emailed PETA several times about this because I'm really interested in what they said in this case. And far be it from me, again, if I've seen several people on As You Learn it indicate their love for animals, and I love animals as well. I don't really advocate PETA as a great foundation, and specifically just some of the outlandish claims they've come across in their advertising. So this is why I'm not a personal fan of theirs. But one of the things they had is they said there's a scientific study to indicate that vegetarians have better sex than people who eat meat, which I found really absurd and fascinating because all I could think about is how in the world did you conduct that particular study? The methodological areas within this just sounded so absurd that I emailed them on several occasions saying, "Can I see?" I just wanted to email them and said, "Can I see this study? I want to read what this study is all about and how in the world did you come to that conclusion?" Which of course I never got an email back, but it is still interesting. But again, this is all data that was reported saying there's statistical significance with some of these claims here. So, and it's not just reporting, painting the company in a positive light, which is not inherently a bad thing, but there are things within scientific reporting that come into things like cherry picking. So finding data that only matches with what your organization comes into play, fabrication or puffery, again, exaggerations for what this can do. And a lot of it will be claims that weren't necessarily made. I mean, this is the very weird claim of if you, I can't even say it with a straight face. They said something to the effect of smelling farts can help with curing cancer, which if you read the actual study, and people have interviewed these scientists for a year that said that's not at all what we said. I mean, they said there are certain things within methane gas that we have found that, I can't remember, it was something with the control group and the experimental group that had a less likely a correlation for. And we'll get into that here in a second. There's instrument error. In fact, I've been handed surveys from students by advertising corporations, and I look at them and say, what in the world are you trying to provide to people? Because there's so many errors in terms of how the instrument, so like a survey, for example, or focus group questions, or, well, I mean, I wouldn't say so much focus group questions because that's not really inherently through data, but experimental. There's so many things that can go wrong, and this is a very big deal when it comes to research, and why when people ask me about it, I take it so seriously in terms of how do we conduct a survey? How do we conduct an experiment? And I'll tell you this, that many people can create a survey. That's not a hard thing to do, but it's also not hard to make one that's really bad. It's extremely difficult to create a very good survey. There's also areas within sample and population error. This actually comes into play with one of the, I think it was a 2004 study about Native Americans' opinion about the Washington Redskins. And this was kind of interesting in terms of these were Native Americans that were based out of Pennsylvania and not in the Maryland and Virginia area. Also, this was, they said self-identified Native Americans were also within it. So this is a little bit of instrument error as well, where, someone could say, my great-great-great-grandfather was half Cherokee, which, would classify Native American status, which is ridiculous, but at the same time, that's where instrument and sample error, again, are you pulling from the area that needs to be pulled from. Because again, when you have a population, you have to say, is this the population that represents the study the best? Far too often, we have people who only interview college students, and that's really unacceptable when it comes to, because y'all, no offense, y'all do not inherently represent the entire population and the inherent values or opinions or beliefs that is held. And again, that's a bad thing. Again, if you sampled a handful of professors, and again, you're looking for something that has nothing to do with professorship, that's a bad population to be looking at in the first place. There's also p-hacking, which this actually has a lot to do with the actual scientist itself, and in terms of manipulating some of the data, which we hope that never happens, but unfortunately it does from time to time. And then the biggest one here is correlations do not equal causality. And I cannot tell you how many times I have to say this when we're talking about advertising, and as well as any kind of study that says, causal, and people making causal claims, and that does not inherently work. So I've got, there's a great website, and I didn't pull all these from it, but there's a great website that looks at correlations of the most ridiculous things. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples. First one is kind of a little bit more of a serious one, of a correlation here between autism and organic food sales. So, this could be where if somebody were to see this guy, they could say organic food causes autism, which it doesn't. But there are correlations towards this. And this is actually, if you look at it, it's a very strong correlation. If you look at the p-value here, so if you're looking at statistics, this is saying 99% of the time it's actually within the same case. So you can make this argument if you wanted to just say within correlations. However, causation is not the case here. Same with, so this is where I go for a little bit of more absurd. In terms of global average temperature versus number of pirates, and the correlations that involve there. Internet Explorer versus murder rate, and how that's dropped down. I mean, hey, good for Internet Explorer, I suppose. Maybe they should put that in their advertising. I'm kidding, they should not. But it is, again, an interesting area to talk with statistics. So, problem with scientific data, again, we've talked about some of these. We've talked about sample error, to say, and this is what I'm talking about here. There's a very popular study that says college students, quote, well, it says college sophomores, quote, aren't people, which is just a way of saying that you can't always sample college students because they may not be accurate of your population. And so, again, that's where that term comes from. So you are people. It's just, again, an expression that is made there. Measurement area we talked about, but generalization. Can this study be replicated? So, a lot of us, when we're doing scientific studies, one of the things we like to do is come up with what are called exploratory stories. Which exploratory stories are essentially something that's relatively new in terms of theory creation. But the problem is if this particular model or theory that's being used cannot be tested in other areas, this is where it could be a problem. Other things that can happen, reliability, maturation, attrition. So within reliability, you have things like maturation, so naturally occurring changes around the person that you are interviewing. So let's say you're doing what's called a longitudinal study, and I interview you or survey you at certain points of the year. So let's say I survey you, goodness gracious, 6 times during a given year. Well, there may be some things that change through maturation of anything that could go on with your life that would severely impact the data, as well as attrition. And again, this is, if you've ever taken a very long survey, what can happen is people drop out. So what can we do? Let's look at advertising research. First and foremost, always start with the question or problem. This is also good within any kind of research, really. When you have, you should always look in terms of your methodology, the way you sample, who you should sample with the question. Also look into be specific in what you're looking and asking for. And this is a definitional thing. So always be clear about what your definitions are, what they mean, because in a lot of cases, and I've had a lot of problems with this, is that the way I teach research methods, for instance, could be way over somebody's head. And again, this may be something where I need to look in terms of specific word choice that other people will understand better. So this is an area within advertising research that needs to be done. There's also nomological negatives. I'm not going to go into that right now. But clear instructions, again, make sure that they know what they're supposed to be doing at any given point in time. Always conduct pilot tests. This is actually really good within focus groups, because if you ever do a focus group, and for some of you who are participating in NSAC, you will do focus groups. Within pilot tests, however, it's good to practice some of the things you might not be expecting. So if you're doing a focus group, for instance, and people don't respond to something, or there's something really interesting that somebody said, and you went on a tangent, and you feel like next time I want to include that. That's what a good pilot test is for. But again, and college students are people, but it isn't the sample that you're looking for in this case. So within advertising ethics, and I'm going to go back to what can we do here in a minute within practice. So within advertising ethics, sorry, I'm bouncing around here a little bit. First and foremost is protecting consumer privacy. I'm putting this up here to demonstrate, again, how we feel about personal information, hiding digital footprint, feeling comfortable with sharing data. And again, this is our problem with Facebook that we've had in terms of sharing data, sharing our personal information, and what our digital footprint looks like. You can use consumer data, but we really should know about it. So in other words, that we feel like we're being manipulated instead of being persuaded. So if I'm being persuaded, then that's something that I don't feel that bad about. Whereas if I feel I'm being manipulated, it might be a different case entirely. And a lot of this comes from the fact that people, granted, this is the college students that I've talked to in terms of advertising ethics within social media. Many people would say, I hate that my information is being given to like government organizations, but I don't mind it if it's given to corporate entities, because it helps with my specificity when it comes to advertising. However, there are examples such as the London's recycling bins, that if your phone passed by the recycling bins, they would be able to access data on your phone and be able to advertise you from there. And you might be able to think of some other examples. And I might actually put that up as a discussion board question. That might be a good one to talk about. In advertising practice, always be transparent, always be truthful as much as possible. Creating ads specific to consumer likes. A lot of this is niche based, especially in the world of media planning today. That again, people actually like when we have these advertisements that are very specific to the things that we want. Reporting your results ethically and accurately. Again, this is just a best practice. This isn't something that you're going to get major claims for, but it might come up that somebody takes exception to, and they find reason to look it up. And again, if they find differently, then that's when problems happen. But if you're reporting things accurately, again, it may not necessarily be that you are going to be highly touted and praised for it. But again, you will never get in trouble for reporting your results ethically and accurately in this case. Also, parasocial relationships and match, which basically means if, let's say that you want to go into, if you wanted to ever do a spokesperson role, or maybe you wanted to get into YouTube to become a social media influencer, Make sure that if there's an organization contacting you, or if you are the organization um, talking to a social media influencer, make sure the product and the content match. Because if it doesn't, you're going to have a lot of weird looks from consumers, and you're also not going to get the results you want. Understanding reach on social media websites and what deems to be effective. CSR typically is very effective within corporate social responsibility, because that's what CSR is. Um, and again, diffusion can work with you or against you. So, if you look at the diffusion of innovation, if this is something that you are promoting and it takes off, that can be really good. But if it takes off in a negative way, it can also be really bad. So again, these are ethical procedures within advertising practice that are very important. I'm not going to get into that one, but other considerations that I would say within this is something that was mentioned before within corporate social responsibility and cause-related advertising. 88% of consumers will buy from socially responsible organizations. So this can be positive employee relations. This can be protection of the environment. This can be donating to a charitable cause. Whatever it may be, looking into veteran service. I mean, again, Walmart is big on that, as well as environmental donation. I think they donate more than any other organization, whether it be government or non-government. So it really kind of depends on what social responsibility you have within advertising. And this is, I've always really liked this, is the way that we look in terms of reporting data and looking into internet research and advertising, is that you may have heard of the 4 Ps of marketing. Well, Braun in 2014, which is again a popular CSR scholar, would say what we should focus on is people, planet, product instead, which I thought was a really cool way of determining how we should be changing things. Organizations to partner with non-government organizations to increase liking. So, and this can go really well if done correctly. I'm going to the one at the bottom now. Granted, let's see if this will zoom in. No, it does not. The one at the bottom is probably one of the most interesting case studies of working with NGOs. And this is KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, obviously. And they did, I think it was 10 cents for every chicken bucket that was sold would go to Susan G. Komen. And it was to date the single most individual CSR effort ever by an organization. It was extremely successful, although absurdly ironic, considering when you think about the leading cause of death amongst women is heart disease. Breast cancer is 3, but heart disease, if memory still serves correctly, it may have changed over the years, but I think that's still the number 1 cause of death. And so again, maybe helping with breast cancer, but unfortunately we're selling fried chicken, which can't be good for your heart. So again, matching products with responsibility. This was a really weird one. But there are other instances of things that went really well. I'll give you another example. Speaking of kind of the Yum family here, Domino's, for instance, I think they're Yum. I can't remember. Domino's has done a new corporate social responsibility initiative of paving roads to make sure that your pizza doesn't flip over during carryout. I don't know how often that happens, but apparently it happens often enough that they want to provide a service to individual communities that they belong to. So really cool effort. And again, when I first heard, I'm like, paving roads, that's really weird, until they helped explain it in this case. And Publix may still be cynics in this case in terms of never trusting a company with anything. Again, if you're the kind of person that says employee relations are extremely important to me, Walmart is probably not going to be the organization that you back and share stock in. It's just probably not going to happen. So Anyway, these are just some of the examples within data, advertising, and ethics. We will talk a little bit more about some areas within advertising ethics in terms of subliminal advertising tomorrow, and that'll be the last day for lecturing. Again, make sure that you are keeping an eye on your discussion boards as well as keeping an eye in terms of the final project. Start early. It's because August 7th is going to be right around the corner. So again, get to researching, get to writing. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.